Hello and welcome to our talk today. My name's Katie Cameron and I'm part of the team at the M&S Archive in Leeds. If you're watching the premiere of this talk, I'm here to answer any questions in the chat on the right hand side. Otherwise, just email us at archive@marksandspencer.com with any queries. So today we're going to take a closer look at a fascinating decade in the history of M&S and in fashion generally, the 1960s. And I wanted to start by thinking about the impact that synthetic fabrics had on the fashions of the decade. The importance of new technology for fabric and garment developments had been acknowledged by M&S since the 1930s, which is when we opened our first textile testing laboratory. Into the 1950s, and with Britain still in austerity, Simon Marks saw advances in textile technology that had been made during the war as the only way to satisfy the demands of the British public quickly and at a price that people could afford. So his aim was to make the housewife's life easier, with garments that were easier to care for, more hard-wearing, easier to wash, and so on. And so by the end of the 1950s, the emphasis was on providing garments that were practical, easy wash and easy wear. These photographs show our textile laboratories in the 1930s on the left and the 1950s on the right. The importance of research into synthetic fabrics and the popularity of the fabrics themselves continued at M&S into the 1960s. In 1960, Dr. Alec Lerner, who is our assistant director, spoke of the importance of science and technology. He saw it as the only way to provide quality in large-scale production. He encouraged suppliers to bring together the kind of scientific and technological brains that pioneered and developed the radar and the jet engine and that split the atom. And here we can see some examples of these early 1960s synthetics. On the left, we see a terylene cotton shirt from 1961, in the middle a cortel dress, and on the right tri-cell blouses from 1960. By 1962, over a third of all the garments we sold were made entirely from synthetic fabrics. There was also lots of work being done on natural fabrics like wool and cotton to develop new finishing and manufacturing techniques to make them easier to wear and easier to care for. Here on the left hand side we can see some cottolene blouses. So it's a natural fabric, but due to the work done in our textile laboratories, we said that these blouses retained their just starched look after washing. And we said that every year fabrics become easier to wash and iron. On the right are blouses made from a silk and rhodia blend. So rhodia was an acetate rayon yarn that had been developed in France. The way that these new fabrics are marketed is interesting. At the end of the 1950s, the emphasis is placed on how easy to wash these synthetic garments are and their quality and how they are reliable, inexpensive and washable. But into the 1960s, we see these priorities change and instead the fashionable qualities of these new fabrics are promoted. We start to see a change in how they're marketed and which properties are promoted to customers. So, for example, these images show some jersey wear outfits from the early 1960s. Jersey wear had been a St. Michael's staple since the 1930s, but in 1960 the jersey wear was made with tricell and banlon. So we suggested that skirts could be cropped to any length that suits you without hemming. The fabric can't ladder. Another example of the emphasis on fashionability in synthetics was the colour coordinates trend of the mid-1960s. So providing customers with mix and match garments was made possible by our in-house colour council. They were working to standardise colours across the business. The department made a survey of all the colours used by all the departments across the business, and they found, for example, 44 different shades of navy. So they had lots of work to do on standardising colours. Their work meant that garments in lamb's wool, botany wool, cortel, even nylon crochet stockings were all available in the same shades of red, green, gold and turquoise. And here we have some photographs of this range from 1966. And the work done by the Colour Council also resulted in upgrades in our dyeing and printing process in 1967. This allowed more vivid prints across all textiles. More vibrant colours were able to be used to fit in with the trends of the 1960s. These images show prints from 1967 and 1968. By 1965, over 2/3 of our textile turnover was from synthetic fabrics. It was therefore considered really important that staff knew as much as possible about these new fabrics and their qualities. They'd be able to then pass this knowledge on to customers. These booklets and leaflets were all published for staff, sales assistants working in store, to help them understand the benefits and properties of the fabrics they were selling. And customers became familiar with these new fabric names like Tricell and Cortel through marketing promoting their wearability and quality. Here we can see on the left an advert for Tricell at Marks & Spencer. And so customers would be able to come to store and ask for fabrics by name. Store signage displayed the name of the fabric as well as the price, so customers would know where to head to find their Tricell dress. For example, on the left we can see a display of all-on sweaters, and on the right we can see Brine Island shirts on display. We advertise these ranges with cinema adverts. The adverts were shown before the main feature. They were very popular adverts, and lots of them won awards at the Cannes Advertising Film Festival. I'd like to share one of them with you now. So this advert is for Acrylan, and it was in cinemas in 1963, and it really pushed home the message that customers should be able to ask for the fabric by name.
Acrylan, Acrylan, St. Michael Acrylan, smart as a button as anyone can see. Acrylan, Acrylan, washable Acrylan, for all the family, come on and try St. Michael clothes with Acrylan. The finest you can buy, yes, St. Michael Acrylan. Acrylan, Acrylan, bony Acrylan, there's a cotton tool, it's nothing when it's made with Acrylan. We smarter than the average pen in St. Michael Acrylan. You cannot find any better than St. Michael Acrylan. Acrylan, Acrylan, St. Michael Acrylan, they're nice and neat and fully free to styles and Acrylan. Keep all the family spick and span in St. Michael Acrylan. Just follow the St. Michael plan with thrifty Acrylan. Chunky sweaters for men, shapely skirts with permanent teeth, new St. Michael coats, so light, so warm, and wonderfully washable, and huggable too. Everyone loves Acrylan. Get St. Michael Acrylan. Buy St. Michael Acrylan. Everything in Acrylan. Buy St. Michael Acrylan. Get St. Michael Acrylan. From Marks & Spencer.
In the 1960s, more than ever before, technology and design at M&S were inseparable. And Hans Schneider was the man who was largely responsible for the success of the women's wear department in the 1960s. Hans had joined M&S in 1949. He was hired to upgrade merchandise following the utility scheme and wartime austerity measures. He'd previously worked in knitwear factories and for designers in Austria before coming to England in the 1930s and working as a fashion buyer for John Lewis. Under his direction, the design department expanded rapidly. There were 8 people in the department in 1949, and by 1967 there were 70. Hans is pictured here on the right, fitting a dress to Serena Sinclair, who was the fashion editor of the Daily Telegraph. She would wear it to the Paris autumn collections later that year. Hans was keen on bringing new talent into the business and on supporting designers who were early in their career. He was also interested in the training of designers at art schools, and in 1958 he'd been appointed chairman of the examining board at London College of Fashion. This was a role that had previously been filled by couturiers Norman Hartnell and Digby Morton. Hans believed that new designers would have a much more rewarding experience working at M&S than in haute couture. The design department worked a year in advance, and every one of the designers was also a technician and fully qualified as a cutter. The department always worked in collaboration with the cloth buying department. They advised on suitability of cloth, as well as organising supplies, fixing prices and delivery dates. As well as our own design team, dress designs were submitted by manufacturers who had their own design departments. On the left-hand side, we can see some sketches by one of our designers, Ken Burgess. They were made in 1967. The 1960s was also heavily influenced by our consultant, Michael Donnellan. He was known as Michael of Carlos Place. Michael was an Irish-born fashion designer who had headed the House of La Chasse in the 1940s before running his own couture house in the 1950s and 60s. And Hans saw him as the perfect fit for M&S. He was really keen to get him working with Marks & Spencer. So in 1962, he was taken on as consultant. Journalist Beryl Hartland commented at the time, "The rich woman goes to Michael for his elegance, beautiful making and scissoring. The not-so-rich get his know-how too in clothes from Marks & Spencer." Michael was seen by the Times as the most perfectionist of London designers in 1966, and possibly as a result of this, M&S made it into their absolutely in list of the same year. Here we can see some photographs of Michael and Hans together. Our design department was more outward looking than in previous years, and we're finding inspiration in a much wider range of places. Michael and Hans travelled to shows together, watching Balenciaga, as they said, the leader in the great classic tradition, and Yves Saint Laurent for the more boutique trends. According to Prudence Glynn, M&S designs bought from Dior or inspired by Balenciaga cost shillings, yet retained that certain quelque chose that cost so many pounds in the Avenue Montaigne. Our designers travelled to Paris, Switzerland and Italy in search of ideas and fabric that could be used or adapted, and to the twice-yearly shows of Dior, Givenchy and other couturiers. Here we can see some of that designer influence, perhaps Yves Saint Laurent or Courrèges, in these 1966-1968 photographs. The design department were also looking at who was shopping at M&S and new potential customer audiences. We saw our customers reading more magazines, watching television and travelling more. The transference of new style ideas had to be faster. We said the wish to be tempted has accelerated, and therefore we needed to satisfy this demand. A lot more women were entering the world of work in the 1960s, and a lot more women were staying in office jobs after marriage. We catered for this by selling ranges of smartly tailored skirt suits and jersey wear aimed at this new market. Here we can see some examples throughout the 1960s, from 1962 on the left to 1967 on the right. Another new group of customers was younger people who now had their own disposable income. We'd sold a few styles for teenagers in the mid-1950s, when there was generally less distinction between teenagers and adults' clothing. In response to the growing youth culture in the 1960s, these ranges became distinct from the children's and adults' ranges. This emerging teen market resulted in ranges we described as designed to suit the tastes and figures of the in-betweens. Developments in synthetic fabrics also meant that these garments were more affordable to a younger market. On the left we have Young Fashions from 1962, and on the right is the younger look of 1966, which boasted of lifted hems, and we said we actually show the knee. These styles were described as an intelligent interpretation of the current op fashion. Another range aimed at younger people was Junior Miss. This range was launched in 1967. We said this is not a jumped up child's department line or a watered down version of the adult range. The St Michael Junior Miss styles are designed to suit the very special tastes and figures of the in-betweens. And Twiggy first modelled for M&S in 1966 in a dress from the Young Look range. She wore a skirt described as well above the knee for the young go-ahead. However, Hans Schneider was keen to distance M&S from pop fashion. He used to visit Carnaby Street and King's Road. He said not for inspiration, but to catch the atmosphere. He said, "It's not the M&S market. Pop clothes are for pop people, and Carnaby Street is an inspiration only to itself." Here we can see two photographs of Twiggy modelling in 1966. The Young Look and Junior Miss ranges were also popular with customers of all ages. Our women's wear consultant, Michael, said, "There is no such thing as an old woman. A woman, whatever her age, can wear bright colours and styles. I was not surprised that the knitted dresses for teenagers that were introduced last year were bought by grandmothers. I know that if a dress is good in itself, anyone can wear it, and will." We also saw some of these ranges aimed at younger customers in our menswear collections. These photographs of the 1965 range show Colin wearing one of the new young men's shirts in drip dry cotton poplin with a smart rounded collar, and a denim texture shirt with new style button down collar. These small nods to fashion, the rounded collar and so on, are an early indication of the growing interest of men in the clothing they wore in the 1960s. The 60s is also when we start to see an increase in spending on menswear in store. Men were buying more clothes and generally had a growing inclination to spend their money on clothing. There was a study undertaken in 1967 titled Consumer Trends and Forecasts. It covered the years 64 to 67, and it showed that men's purchases were also less subject to seasonal fluctuations. When broken down by brand, the study showed M&S as the most popular across both men's and women's wear. The move towards more modern design continued into the end of the 1960s, though always with an eye on mass appeal and quality rather than extreme fashionability. Anthony King Deacon, writing in The Times in 1969, explained how difficult it was for supermarkets, as he called them, to offer menswear ranges that would be as popular with customers in Glasgow as it was in London. He said, "Supermarket fashion is a difficult trade. A generalisation of fashion trends is hard to find. What may sell in abundance in Oxford Street could well be a flop in Glasgow. The buyers and section controllers at Marks & Spencer are aware of the dangers in entering this market and have sifted through the whims, the experiments and the follies of the clothing trade and have produced an accurate medium, not too dull for London and not too way out for the provinces." He illustrated his article with a photograph of a model wearing a cream zip front cardigan with navy and camel trims and a pair of crimpline trousers and suede slip-ons. The images that are shown here are taken from a 1969 staff magazine at M&S. I'd like to finish this look at the 60s with one more cinema advert. This one promotes woolen knitwear. By the mid-1960s, our cinema adverts featured fewer dance routines and more rather conceptual ideas. This advert is called 2 First Class Tickets and it was made around 1965.
British wool knitwear from Marks & Spencer. St. Michael 3-piece suits, all wool, double jersey. Sweaters and sweater dresses. Lamb's wool from Marks & Spencer. St. Michael British wool knitwear. All wool dresses. Two-piece and jumper suits in double jersey. You feel so good in Shetland wool. St. Michael clothes in wool, only from Marks & Spencer.
And that brings us to the end of our talk today. Thank you for joining us. If you've got any questions, just email us at archive@marksandspencer.com. And if you'd like to visit us, the M&S Archive exhibition is open Monday to Friday and the second Saturday of the month from 10 AM to 4 PM.